Right. Hello, everyone. My name is Geraint Radford. I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about macro photography. I'll talk to you about the camera settings, some of the kit, but more importantly, just to show you some pictures of some pretty cool bugs. Big thanks to Olympus and to Carmarthen Cameras for putting on this awesome event. It's actually a lot bigger already than I thought it was going to be. Thanks, everyone, for coming. But should we give these guys a little clap, a little round of applause? Thank you for popping me on. Thanks, man. So now all that stuff out of the way, let's get into the important bit. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. I like bugs. I grew up fascinated by bugs. I lived in the Rhondda Valleys in the 90s. Obviously, there's not a lot to do. So started to spend a lot of time outside, looking at nature. I soon discovered these little tiny creatures, and I just became fascinated. I wanted to know everything about them. But more importantly, I just wanted to know, what they look like. I like biscuits. That's probably the biggest take-home for this, but specifically the bourbon biscuit. Now, to me, I think this is a superior biscuit. It's one of the best dunkers. And they're rather photogenic as well. But we're here to talk about macro, aren't we? So one last look for good measure. There we are. Have we got bourbons in today? Yeah. Oh. Welsh cakes. Second best thing. So for me, attaching a macro lens is like being sent away to a completely different planet. Everyday scenes are transformed, and all the little creatures that live around us are suddenly revealed. If you haven't tried macro photography, I urge you to just get into it. It's the most rewarding thing I've ever done. So this is a little woodlouse. Now, how many times do we look at a woodlouse? And how many times do we photograph them? But you look at them under high magnifications, and then you suddenly see, like, these guys look like they're made of metal, and they got eyes like blackberries, and they just somehow take on this brand new persona. So this was with the EM1 Mark II with a 60mm macro lens and one set of extension tubes. An ant. One of the things we see pretty much every single day, sometimes in your house, sometimes running over your jam jar. But when you magnify them, they become just like any other animal. This is filling the frame just as much as an elephant would. But we've just made something this big, now literally as big as we want it. So this little ant was running along next to a little river, and out of nowhere, it just started just plonked itself down, had a little sit down, and started rubbing his face. So I took a couple of frames of it, and this is the one kind of connected to me a little bit. It looks like it's staring out at the world with this sort of joyous little face. And it's a couple of millimeters, but now it's just like this gigantic, happy little alien. Oh, I will say none of these insects are trapped or none of that nonsense. Everything is photographed out in the wild as and where they're found. There's no manipulation of them. And then no, they're sweet enough, aren't they? That's like the usual comeback to that one. Okay, this is one of my favorite things about macro photography is when you start moving the lens closer and closer and closer to the subject, and after this blur, like a face appears. So I'll show you a quick video if it plays. Oh, look at that behaving. That I will never, ever get bored of. I could watch this video on loop for 3 days straight. So now I've showed you a couple of pictures. I'll just run you through the macro photography kit after I've wetted the whistle. It depends on the size of the subject. So if it's a damselfly, I use about 36mm of extension. If it's an ant, I've got 2 full sets, and I can't remember off the top of my head what it comes to. I think it's 50-odd millimeters of extension then. So my macro kit currently consists of 2 cameras, the OMD EM1X, which is over there, and the OMD EM1 Mark II, which is by here somewhere. We've moved it. And added to that, I've got the Olympus 60mm macro lens. Now, if you're like a Micro Four Thirds shooter or maybe thinking about getting into it, especially for macro, this is an epic lens because it's got the full frame equivalent focal length of 120mm at f2.8. And that's it. It's that small and lightweight. I mean, you've seen 105 macros, and they're like beer cans. It's like that thing. It's razor sharp, but also nice and small as well. I've got the STF8 macro twin flash, and if I'm using extension tubes, I use the Olympus FL900R flash. It's basically a big weather-sealed flash gun, but I use it with a flash bracket and a gigantic softbox just to diffuse the light a little bit. So that's a picture of the EM1 Mark II and the STF8, but this is it here as well. So the STF8 is pretty cool because it's kind of like a ring flash in terms of like it mounts to the front of the lens, but you've got these little neat flash heads you can like position wherever you like. We've got these wicked cool diffusers. Also, you can angle the actual flashes here. You can split the power between each head, so you can even actually fire it one head at a time as well if you want. So unlike ring flashes, which give you one frame of light or one look, unless you block like half of it off, these give you a little bit more flexibility, and it works really well with the built-in focus stacking features as well, which we'll talk about a little bit later. All of that is weather sealed as well, including the flash. You know, we live in Wales, and this sunshine is a bit of a treat for us. We don't usually see it, so having weather sealed kit is super important for me. So why? It's weird how you all asked that at once, wasn't it? Why am I using Micro Four Thirds and not full frame? Well, I will confess, I used to use full frame, but I had the Olympus kit on a pro loan for like 3 weeks and sold my full frame kit after 3 days of using it. It's just smaller, lighter, and I found it a little bit more freeing. And for macro photography, for me, this was just a better system to go with. The first thing was the Micro Four Thirds sensor itself. So what it means is that I've got twice the magnification to begin with versus full frame. I can photograph subjects that are twice as small just off the bat than I could before. So in macro photography, magnification is king. There's never too much magnification. So in real terms, it means I can go from a shot like this to a shot like that without adding any extra extension tubes or filters or anything like that. It's just literally, it focuses from there to there. Makes life an awful lot easier. But unfortunately, it's not all roses because magnification reduces depth of field. So we know like the closer you get to your subject, the less depth of field you have to work with. Like if I took a portrait of you now, say at f2.8, maybe just your eyes. I wouldn't want to do that. No, I think you would. You're all right. At f2.8, maybe one eye would be in focus. But if you was over there and I took a picture at f2.8, like pretty much your entire body would be in focus and the background would be diffused just because of subject distance. So that was like a little stumbling block that I had to get my head around. And this is where the Olympus sort of kit kind of took over. Now, Olympus recently appointed me as their macro ambassador, so I can't talk about kit in the same way I used to because it always feels like a bit of a pitch. But I will say it was a genuine swap. I bought all my own stuff, so everything I'm telling you is truth. We've already had a chat about a lot of the features. You know, Christina went through them. But for me, the two that came into handy before I do is the 5-axis stabilizer and built-in focus stacking. Now, that blew my mind. The fact that the camera does built-in focus stacking was like a revelation to me. But we're going to come to that a little bit later on because the talk is split up into 2 halves and focus stacking is a bit later. So I'm going to show you a couple of single-shot pictures now. But before we go into that, I'll tell you maybe a little bit about what I look for in a picture. So connection between the subject and the viewer is like super important to me. These creatures are unseeable to us without technology. So if you can get a picture that connects at some level, then to me that's a winner. But you don't get it like every single time, but it's just something maybe to bear in mind when you're shooting. Color is a big one. The way I shoot is under very, very high magnification. So I'm using flash instead of natural light. So a lot of wildlife photographers and portraits use light to kind of emphasize the subjects. I tend to go around it by using color to either complement or enhance the subject, unless, of course, I put it in black and white. That's usually if the color thing didn't work, though. And clarity. So I'm a detail nerd. Like I've already said that these creatures are unseeable, so I want to show them off with crazy high detail. And you need good glass really to do that. There we go. So first picture of the day is a ladybird taking off. Now, this one, I can't really take any credit for, aside from the fact that I was pointing my camera at the ladybird. I was taking some shots, and I clicked, and that happened. So whereas I'd love to be able to tell you, no, I tracked it in midair. I watched his little legs waiting for it to flap off. But none of that. It was just a miracle. But the flash saved the day in that respect, because this was only at 250th of a second. You know, to do that without flash, you need like a millionth of a second or something. We live in Wales. We don't have that sort of light. So having a relatively low shutter speed with an aperture of about f4, which in full frame terms is f8, but without, you know, compromising on light, managed to get that. Now, I didn't even know that these bits opened up like that, and that was revealed to me after the photograph. So photography teaches you stuff about the thing you're taking pictures of at this scale. I love this guy or girl. I didn't ask it which one it was. I wasn't around it long enough. Quirky. I named it Quirky. This is one of Sean's favorite pictures. He's cute, isn't he? He's went mega. So I was doing my usual thing. You see, like, I tend to photograph bugs almost like they're people, and I try to get portraits of them. So I was doing my usual thing of kneeling down this far away from the grasshopper's face, and I was trying to do a focus stack, and out of nowhere, Quirky just like flopped off the blade of grass he was sat on. I clicked the shutter, and that happened. And now I was like, please, please just tell me those eyes are in focus. Because that's the first thing you think about, isn't it? So I zoomed in on the back, and I was like, both these eyes are in. And I was just glad that I was like on my own in the field or wherever I was, because I was literally dancing and jumping down on the spot. It's this curve here that makes it, and the fact that he looks like he's got a little cheeky smile on his face. So that's one of my favorites ever. This one I got a couple of days ago. Now, I'm trying to shoot not as tight lately. I've been in like a sort of photographic, well, comfort zone. I think every now and then it's quite important to try to get out of it and shoot slightly differently. And I broke my hand, so I can't use my usual setup until like tomorrow. So by including a little bit of the environment, it gives you a bit more sense of depth and a sense of scale. So this image was shot at f2.8. Beautiful shallow depth of field. You almost don't see the fly until you kind of like scan around the frame, and then we've got this flower then just to offset him. I placed the fly at the very bottom of the corner just to make it slightly quirky. And with the mirrorless system, it kind of helps you a lot in getting creative with your compositions, because your focus points cover the entire frame. So you can move that focus point right the way down there and actually autofocus. Like beforehand, I'd have to manually focus at f2.8 and just hope that he was in. Nowadays, it just kind of does it for me, which is quite nice.
Can I ask you a question? I'm sorry about it. How far away are you from these insects with that 60 mil?
It depends. Right, in this image, I was probably about a foot away.
Right.
For that one, I was about 3 inches away.
Because he's been trying to get me to buy one, you see. I use the 12-50 at the moment.
Yeah, if you get it, like a dedicated macro lens will make your life an awful lot easier. Because you can, and the thing is, I use it as like a walkabout lens. So I use it for photographing the tiny things, but it doubles up like a landscape lens because you can shoot panoramas. So it's actually one of the more versatile lenses you can get. It's quite nice being able to photograph an ant and a mountain with just one lens.
Thank you.
Anytime, bud.
Did you say you use autofocus or in manual?
If it's extension tubes, it's manual focus. And every now and then, I will use continuous autofocus as well. So this picture is actually using continuous autofocus. So that tied in nicely there. I paid him to come along and planted him at that time.
Is that single focus point then?
Yeah, so it's, yeah, we've got, in the Olympus system, we've got like the smallest focus point you're probably ever going to see, and it's a godsend for this kind of thing. You can shoot through foliage, but also my subjects are so small that it's quite nice to have a focus point that literally just pick it up anywhere. So this was shot at 125th of a second in natural light at f3.5 at 400 ISO. Now I could see that this bug was on like a little mission. He was walking along the leaf, and I kind of guessed where he was going to go, set the camera up, pre-focused it to about there, and as the bug started coming into frame, I activated the continuous autofocus. If you got an Olympus system, the sensitivity was set to -2, because they're not erratic. They're quite slow-moving creatures. Yeah, so for that, it's -2. And then they just tracked it on the way in. I think I shot about 10 frames, and this is the one that worked. I deliberately shot it in natural light because the flash may have blown out all the detail because I'm working pretty close. And because he's in a weird position, I wanted to include a tiny bit of motion blur just to show that it wasn't kind of fridged or glued or some sick thing like that. So it just, that little bit of motion blur in the arm shows that it's actually alive and healthy. This one I got, I think, was it last night or the night before? I actually went out the other day and I thought, I'm gonna get a silhouette today. And so in my mind, I was like, I'm gonna look for some sort of creature, because I never go out with an actual plan. It's just a rough idea of what I want to get. And it's like the last trickle of light, I finally found a subject where a silhouette would work. So this is, I think, a common blue damselfly, just perched up on a blade of grass. And the sun had just about gone. And again, with the mirrorless system, you get a WYSIWYG viewfinder, so you see your exposure through the viewfinder. So usually silhouettes are a little bit hard to gauge, but you just dial in like your exposure compensator until it looks okay, and then click. So it sounds really difficult, but it's pretty straightforward nowadays. So, but if you're going to do it without that, you just expose for the sky, and then that happens. This was shot at f7-ish on the Micro Four Thirds, so it looks like f14. So everything's in, but that meant that because I'm not compromising on depth of field with a wider aperture, it means that I can get most of it in at 200th of a second handheld.
What's your maximum f-stop?
That I would go to? Yeah. F7 is pushing it. That's really, f8 was where I tend to cut off. Now this one is one of my all-time favorite pictures. It's about 3 years of work. Now I will say I wasn't sat next to the pond for 3 years straight. You know, generation after generation of pond skipper trying to learn their ways. But if I saw one out and about, I'd try to give it a little bit of a go. But it was only like last year where this shot actually happened. These little creatures are notoriously hard to get close to, and they just don't want you anywhere near them. But this little fella in particular didn't mind. So there's like a bit of a don't try this at home warning, because I had my camera and lens half submerged in the little pond trying to get a picture of it. I was like, oh, it's been 3 years, I've got insurance. If I write it off, I write it off. But thankfully it was fine. I shot it at f6.3 with a flash, and I had my cheek like this in the puddle, trying to look through the viewfinder. I was blowing bubbles. And then I got a couple of nice shots of it, just kind of stood like this. So it's a perfect reflection. I was like, okay, I'm happy with that. But I wonder if something will happen. So if you just stay with your subjects for a little bit, chances are they'll either leave or do something. And luckily for me, in this respect, it did something. So I was watching it for a couple of minutes, and like a naughty dog, it'd like pick up one leg and then pick up another one. I was like, what are you doing? And then out of nowhere, like Black Beauty, it like reared up. And what I find fascinating about it is that it's dropped all its weight over to here, and it's not even making a dent in the surface tension. They're so perfect for what they do. So I'm mega pleased to have this picture. It's even got little go faster stripes over here, look. You can't see my laser on there, look. I spent 10 quid on this specifically so I could point at things, and you can't even see it. Now, going back to the theme of the common, this is a fly. Now, back in April, my buddy Rob, who sat over there, see him at the back, we did this little Instagram takeover for Olympus. It was World Wildlife Day. So we started in the morning up, where did we go? Neath Knoll? Went into Neath Knoll, and we started off the day taking pictures of birds and all this kind of stuff. And the sun came up really high, and the water was really ripply. And we took some pictures of swans and geese with this beautiful bokeh and specular highlights. And I was like, I have to find a way of getting that into my macro work. So I was out and about walking. And have you seen those like big rocks? I think they've got like a high mineral or salt content, and they just kind of like sparkle when you look at them. I looked at that and I thought, I wonder if that's going to do the same thing. So I focused the macro lens down to its closest focusing distance, pointed at the rock, and then all this beautiful sparkly stuff started happening. And then it was just a case of hoping and hoping that something would show up. And I was like, in my mind, is it going to be a jumping spider? Is it going to be a butterfly? Is it going to be a dragonfly? And the fly landed. And I couldn't have been happier, because these are like some of the most persecuted or described as grossest subjects ever, but now it looks like a rock star. It's got this beautiful scenery, and what you try to get in these pictures is it doesn't matter what lands in there, because the overall image makes it, and then that enhances the subject. In macro, the bugs are so interested in themselves, you can just kind of rely on that. But to sort of get a little bit more interesting, you need to go beyond just how cool they look and maybe try to get something a little bit more interesting and dynamic. This ain't the bug, by the way. If you're already keen-sighted, you'll notice this isn't one. But it's sticking with the theme of reflections, really. This picture sat on my hard drive for about 3 months after I took it. It was one of those ones where I wasn't sure about it. And then I looked at it again one day. I thought, yeah, I kind of like this. I like the bluey tones up in the background. You got this big green area, and then obviously the reflection there. I was just in full bug mode, so anything that wasn't a bug just wasn't going on the internet. But this is shot at f2.8, just to create this beautiful diffuse foreground and beautiful diffuse background. I'm going to stand away so you can take this guy in. So this is a newly emerged damselfly poking from underneath a fern. This is shot at about f5.6, which is about 11-ish. And what I love about photographing damselflies is that their faces go this way instead of this way, meaning that both their eyes are on the same focal plane. So you don't have to worry about depth of field as much, because if you just point it at one eye, the other eye is going to be in focus. It makes life an awful, awful lot easier. So when I first saw this picture, I thought, it's a damselfly looking at some ferns. And then I stripped it away in black and white, and I put it out on the internet, and a couple of people started commenting. And one of them that kind of shone through was somebody said it looked to them as though they were looking up at the sky, and then there's a giant bug looking back down. And I was like, I just made this bug into God. So I can't see this creature any other way now. And these gigantic, like, pseudo-pupils just make it look almost cartoonish, don't they? This is with the EM1X, 2 sets of extension tubes, and the FL900 crazy setup that I've got on a flash bracket. I think it's a 30-centimeter diffuser just to spread the light out. Oh, no, I shoot everything handheld. So, yeah. I am looking like at adding a tripod into what I'm doing, because I want to like change things up a little bit. Focus stacking goes up to 15 frames, which is awesome, but bracketing goes up to 999. And I want to see what that looks like. So I'm not good enough to keep that still for 1,000 shots. Maybe if I did a lot of push-ups or something, I might get there one day. Yeah, you just buy a new PC and just do one, and then just leave it. This weevil is genuinely probably about this big. It's 3 millimeters on a good day. And this, can you tell from there where it lives and what kind of crops where it's living in? Have you ever seen those like dandelion clocks? You know, when you pick them up as a kid, you go 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. A dead dandelion. It's actually living in one of those. And this is the thing about macro photography. Just the more magnification you get, it transforms the entire world. And I can never get bored of it. So this is a single frame, f5.6. I did actually shoot the focus stack of it, but like this came into focus, and then this started coming into focus, and then it lost that sort of dreamy kind of feel that it's got to it. And again, the overall image should complement the subject. It's not always about getting everything sharp. So sometimes it's just about getting the best thing for the subject. Focus stacking. Right, I need a drink before we get into this one. Now, does anyone here do focus stacking? I know you do. Anyone know what focus stacking is? Yep. Anyone never heard of it before?
I've not used it.
Okay. Well, just in case you've never heard of it before, I'll just run you through the basic principles. So this picture is a nettle weevil, conveniently sat on a nettle. So you can see his eyes are in focus. He's got the nice green background which complements the actual creature itself. But if you're really keen-eyed, you'll notice that there's something going on here. He's got a bit of a snaggletooth. Now, I want to include that in the picture as part of his character. So you bring the camera out a bit to focus on there, and then his eyes go out of focus. And then you're like, what do I do? And that's where focus stacking helps. So basically, you shoot multiple frames at different focus points, working in, and the end result is that. So you've got his entire face in focus, and everybody's happy. It's just taking it to another level. So this is a nice little portrait of a ladybird. It's just sat there. Now, if that ladybird flew away, I'd be perfectly happy with this picture because there's enough of him kind of in focus to make a portrait out of it. But if I zoom in, you can see just how shallow this depth of field actually is. A ladybird is probably 5 or 6 millimeters. It's just his face is sharp. And you actually see, look, the band of in focus that we've got here, barely anything to work with. And we can use a shallow depth of field to hide elements within a frame. We do it in portraiture all the time. We blow the background away so there's nothing distracting there. But in macro, a shallow depth of field can actually harm your subject and actually harm the story as well. So if you move the focus point in a little bit, you notice that he's covered in raindrops. Now you can't see that in the original shot, so there's an element of the story here that's missing. And I got soaking taking this picture, and I want to show that off. And I'm going to leave it out. So I shot 9 frames, handheld manually, one at a time. So you go like this, you take a picture of his face, then you move the camera maybe a little bit closer, take another one, move the camera a little bit closer, take another one. You do that 9 times and just hope they line up. So if I'm using extension tubes, that's how I do it. And the end result is that. You got everything in focus. Now there's kind of like a train of thought out there that focus stacking is cheating. Nope. I think it can't be cheating because it's harder to do. It's like running a marathon with a backpack on and calling it cheating. I wish there was an easier way of doing it, but there's not. You cannot stop your lens down enough to get everything in focus. If I shot that at f1 million, I might still have a chance, but I think diffraction might be a problem at those sort of f numbers. You won't have any light because of the small aperture. So in order for me to get everything that sharp, I have to focus stack it. But if I zoom in again, you can just see, look, the level of depth of field you're gaining. And again, I didn't even know that they had that thing there. But this is what macrophotography does. It just reveals things to you that you just never, ever, ever see. You will notice that this one's got a bit more of a cool tone. That one's been, this is straight out of camera. This one's been processed a little bit. And because it was like a wet and cold day, I figured the cool tones will suit the overall picture a lot better. Like the warm is more complementary, but it's not really how the day was. If I can, which basically if I'm not using extension tubes, I let the camera do the focus stacking for me, and it's super, super handy. But it doesn't just stack. It gives you like a couple of options. So on the EM1X and the EM1 Mark II, which just had a firmware upgrade, a lot of the features from the EM1X actually came down to the EM1 Mark II, so it's literally like having a brand new camera. I almost boxed it back up and unwrapped it again like Christmas. So you can set how many shots you want it to do. So it's between 3 and 15 on both systems. And you can tell it how big a step to take in between each frame as well. So it's not just like, you're not stuck with anything. You've got a lot of creative control and a lot of flexibility. So it goes from between 1 and 10. A good rule of thumb that I use is leave it at 5 and set your aperture to f5.6. That's generally what I'm setting it to. It's like a sort of one-trick thing that generally works. If you start kind of expanding the jumps, you have to fill in that space with depth of field. So if you imagine it's going from here and then taking a big hop over to here, there's a gap there. If you shot at f2.8, there's only like a fraction of depth of field. But if you stop your lens down a little bit, it's going to fill in that gap, and then you're going to get more chance of an overlay, and then the picture's going to look a lot better for it. I could talk to you all day about this, but it's easy for me to just kind of show you how it works.
Stay perfectly still then?
That's where the stabilizer comes in, see? Because I could shoot down to like 1/10 of a second with a 120mm macro lens, I'm not staying still, the camera's keeping it still. So it just helps a lot. Yeah, obviously, if you haven't got that in, you just pop a tripod on there. But you literally just hold it. But for the purpose of this, I was doing an Instagram story. So every now and then on Instagram, I take people out for the day on the stories. I tried filming a video the other day to show this off, but this will look better. So I'll just show you how the focus stacking thing works. That's a finger, by the way. What we've got a cropping box here, so you can compose your picture, because when you're focus stacking, you have to leave a little bit of leeway for aligning and cropping later. So now you've got a guide, which wasn't here before we had the firmware update, so that's a nice little feature.
It's not on the Mark 1.
No, it's on the EM1 Mark II, and we literally had it like a month ago. So you compose like this, and then hopefully this will work now. I'm waiting with bated breath. There we go. So now it just shot 15 frames, and then it's blending them together. So it sounds really like convoluted and difficult, but that just shot 15 frames. You could be off a little bit. I think you've got to be about 95% of the way there, because the camera, or if you process later, the software will actually align it for you and keep it in. So that's what that crop box is for. It's just allow for that little bit.
You always use the touch screen.
I did it that time because I was on a tripod and I had a phone in my hand. Usually I just hold it and just click the shutter down and just let it do its thing. And that's the end result we've got. And what I love about it is because it's still got a relatively shallow depth of field. And weirdly, you can use focus stacking to keep a shallow depth of field. I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute, because you think in terms of expanding depth of field, but quite often it's just like the other way around too. And I'll just show you a quick crop just to see how much detail you're pulling out of there.
You do that with your differential.
Sorry?
Do that with the differential.
Yeah, that's it. So that one was set to 1 at f2.8 because the subject was at a distance. So I wanted all the shots grouped together with a wide aperture just to make sure that I still had a shallow depth of field. I did not want this bit in focus because they were distracted from the actual damselfly itself. So by keeping all the files grouped close together, it just meant that I'm in complete control of my depth of field now. So now I showed you what focus stacking is and what it does. I'll just show you a couple of pictures now where I've used that focus stacking technique. Probably one of the most laid-back shield beetles I've ever seen. And I can't believe it because if you look, he's got a leg missing. I didn't even notice at the time. He's just laying there like that, like Del Boy, just chilling out, looking straight in the camera like he hasn't got a care in the world. And I was like, if I broke my hand the other day.
It's like the bartender just moved the bloody counter.
It's that bit, isn't it? And he's like picking him up, he's just trying to look cool again. It's like, he didn't whinge. The whole time I was with him, he didn't complain once. And there's me, I hurt myself and I went to Instagram and told a couple of thousand people. I wanted the attention, but this guy didn't care. But you could see, I showed you that ladybird picture earlier and I pointed out that really razor-thin depth of field. You can see how much more we've got to work with just based over here now. So this is another 10 frames shot at f5.6. f5.6 is doubled in full frame, so it's technically 10 frames at f11-ish. And we're still with a shallow depth of field. For this composition, I chose to shoot from back a little bit. This beautiful curve and sweep of the leaf kind of made the picture, and it's kind of like the fly thing earlier. It doesn't really matter what's in there because the composition enhances the subject. But I couldn't be more grateful that that little shield bug, was just chilling out and leaning like that. Apologize a little bit if you're scared of spiders. But this is a female spotted wolf spider. Have you ever seen these wolf spiders in real life? They're only like this big. I mean, it's eating the fly, and they almost look like the same size. I'm literally, forgive me if you can't see, I'm like this at this point, with the screen flipped down, pointed up, trying to get the spider looking straight down. I shot 15 frames handheld at f2.8. In the real world, I probably could have shot this in one frame. I could have done it like f11. Do you want to block this? I need to stop bringing like tinted sunglasses in for people. Like, if you're scared of spiders, there you go. I'll skip it in a minute. If I shot this at f11, this would have been in focus. This would have been in focus. But also the background would have been in focus as well. When you focus stack, it prioritizes the sharp bits. Anything that isn't sharp just stays diffused, even the backgrounds. So when you're focus stacking, it's really, really liberating because you're kind of overcoming the physics of photography. You don't have to have a background that's in focus just because you want increased shallow depth of field. You look again now. Pretty butterfly. Again, sticking with the less is more kind of thing. This is a super close-up portrait of a butterfly, and basically I looked at it and I thought, look how cool these eyeballs are. They look nothing like ours, and yet you can still tell that they're eyes. It's like, how is that thing seeing? So you can see that its face is turned slightly away from the camera. So a single frame wouldn't have got it in focus. I was already at 5.6. So I shot one frame here, moved the camera in ever so slightly, and shot another frame. We've got this beautiful yellow colors working nicely against the greens. It's that color thing I was talking to you about earlier. Sticking with the theme of color, this is Brian the mayfly, nymph. This guy is like that. And it just so happened that I found him just sat perfectly on a dandelion. So under these high magnifications, that dandelion literally turned into like a studio backdrop. It's a gigantic wall of yellow. Sticking what I did with the spider earlier, I shot from this angle because quite often, well, most of the time really, we're looking at bugs from this perspective. It's quite nice sometimes to just flip that around and then give them like the sort of sense of power. You can imagine, like, you're all sat here now, this bug is up here looking down. It's the way we never see him. I shot an in-camera focus stack at 10 frames again, and this is with extension tubes, and I actually let the camera do it in this term, but it did it once. I thought I wonder if it'd do it again, and it kind of did it the second time. But that's third-party extension tubes, and I think I spent £20 on them. So I can't really knock the actual stacking mechanism because the kit, the extension tubes I'm using aren't pro quality.
Any flash?
Yes. Sorry, if it's extension tubes, 100% flash. Extension tubes, they've got this lovely little way of getting rid of your three best friends in macro photography. Depth of field is gone out the window. Ambient light has left the party. And there's another one I just forgot about. It'll come to me at the end. What is it? What is it? There's depth of field with working distance. So without extension tubes, I can work like this far away. With extension tubes, you're like down there. But when I was using full frame, I had like this many extension tubes, a 24mm prime lens reverse mounted, and I was working like that far away from him. You can almost see him like pushing it, get away. But now you've got a little bit of working distance, less extension tubes, and more magnification. So this, I'm sorry, is a tiny little orb spider in my garden. And again, this is when I first discovered that color, it kind of works to emphasize the subject. So we've got this beautiful yellowy color working nicely against the pinks. I shot 2 frames for focus stack, one for the eyes, and then just one for up here, because I wanted, it's a little bit of a brutal picture, isn't it? It's holding on to what I tell the younger people in the audience, that it's a BlackBerry. You don't tell them the truth. So if you're at home watching, it's a BlackBerry, if your youngsters are there, right? Deliberately kept a shallow depth of field because this is quite a textured background. If that was more resolved, it would have been competing against the subject. So by keeping that diffused, you're placing all of the emphasis on the subject there. We've got these nice diagonals coming in, which lead you to the leg. And if you're really keen-eyed, you'll notice that it's stood on a tiny little web. When I was looking at it, I just thought it was balancing one leg, but it's not. It's rested on a little bit of web. Don't go overboard on it. It's because insects are kind of reflective anyway, and I'm lighting them with a big diffused light. So you'll be amazed just how much color is in there anyway.
Because the greens and things are quite in a lot of your images, and the colors look quite vibrant.
If you look at the screen, I think it's the TV is up in it a little bit because they look a little bit too sharp too. When you look at it on here, it looks a little bit more natural. But that's when you light things really, really well, especially bugs, their colors come out. And this green here is ambient light being reflected up from when the flash hit it. So that's why you get an awful lot of color coming into there.
Panasonic TV, is it?
Is it a Panas? That's what it is it? We'll dull the saturation down for like the Q&A. But this has got all 3 of the C's I was chatting about earlier. There's got the color there, it's got the clarity, but more importantly, you're connecting with it. It's this damselfly sat there looking straight at you with a big, giant smile on his face. And that's like all 3 of the things come into one for me there. This is with the EM1X, 2 sets of extension tubes, the FL900 flash on the flash bracket again. And this is literally 3 or 4 frames just focus stacked. Just enough to make sure that, there's enough of his eyes there just to pull you in. and a little bit of his mouth, and his teeth, look.
It's just as heavy as your full frame now, isn't it?
What's that?
That's just as heavy as your full frame. Canon full frame.
I noticed that it's not as, well, like I came from like a D5, so I had one of them and swapped over for this. And it's a little bit heavier than the Mark 1, but the fact that all the lenses are so much smaller, it balances it out anyway. I mean, like the body's slightly heavier, but your lenses are still so compact. For me, it doesn't make that too much of a difference. And like 7.5 stops of stability in that thing, it just, I couldn't be shooting without it, which is quite, oh, sorry. Pass her the glasses. So this is Wanda McDorris, affectionately named by a couple of my Instagram followers. You know that video I showed you earlier of my Instagram thing? So every now and then I'm going out, and I must look like a bit of a weirdo just talking to myself, or like I'm trying to find a signal. So I'm like this, filming myself. And Wanda McDorris showed up, and I was like, this is a female spider. Somebody throw a name in. And there was a couple of good ones, but Wanda was a good one, and Doris was a good one. I couldn't pick between the two, so I named her Wanda McDorris. Now, I learned a lesson in patience with Wanda, because she, every time I looked at her on this little rock, she'd just run away, and she'd like duck under this little leaf. So I'd go in to take a shot, she'd disappear, then I'd just like walk away, and then she'd run back out again. And I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna go in again. And she'd do that, and we did this probably for about 2 days straight, until I realized if I just stay here, I wonder what happens. So I stayed there, 30 seconds later, she just came out. And I sat there, I opened up a flask, ate a couple of bourbons, and just gave her like time, because like time is like your best friend with macro. You got to gain the trust of even the bugs. You have to put the time in. So she, after a couple of minutes, stayed perfectly still and allowed me to put my camera lens on this giant diffuser that far away from her face. And now she is like 6 millimeters. So that face is a couple of mil. Again, I'm going with that thing of shooting, flipping the perspectives around so she's looking down at us. Oh, you could tell it's a lady, by the way, because of the little palps, the skinny little palps, they call them at the front. The guy's got these things that look like boxing gloves. They use them to, like, woo ladies, I say. It's funny, I was watching one, and he's next to Wanda, and he's looking at her, and I was like, what's he doing? Because he just go, every now and then, you go like this. And I was like, nah. I was like, he's winding me up. And then he'd go like this, and he'd go. He's trying to woo Wanda. And he didn't. But so shallow that he looked over, there's another lady, and off he goes again. And I was like, he's just going to try us on, literally with anyone who's around. He didn't try it on with me, but I was deeply offended. So, sticking with the theme of, if you've got a cooperative, bug or creature, give it time, stay with it, and then you'll get different or maybe better pictures. So this is a small skipper butterfly. It says, I got this literally like a week ago. A handheld in-camera focus stack on the AM1X. No extension tubes for a change. I thought I'd have a little change now, but you can see that we're sharp from there right the way to there. If you've ever tried photographing a butterfly, you know how hard it is to get the antennae and the eyes in focus. I struggled to get it done in one shot, so I shot, I think, 10 or 15 frames at f5.6. Like this, clicked it, let the camera do the work, and now everything's in. But if you noticed, right, they've got these really pretty eyelashes. So it's like, I want to see them. So I chucked some extension tubes on and got in closer. Now, this isn't cropped. None of these are cropped except the little bit of the stacking. And look at that. You've got these gigantic, beautiful eyelashes. This is 10 frames again. But I've done it one shot at a time now because we've got the extension tubes on. But they've got these little tiny, sticky up, Hello Kitty ears. I didn't even know they had them. When you're closer to your subject, you get an awful lot more detail. So a lot of people, they've got 50 megapixel cameras, and they go, well, I can crop. But it's like, you can, but you don't get this three-dimensional effect of being closer because everything's slightly wider because you're closer. And you also don't get that sense of 3D. This is why I prefer to work closer. And plus, the video I showed you of the fly at the beginning, when you zooming in, the face appears. That's the magic bit for me. And if I was relying on cropping, I wouldn't be getting that. I love being closer to them. Another little ladybird, but slightly different angle, and it's a bit more of an environmental shot. So this is using 2 sets of tubes again on the EM1 Mark II this time. Little tiny bit of fill flash, but most of the exposure here came from the beautiful evening light that was setting. So I shot it at f2.8 to let all that ambient light in. The flash power was down on something like a 64th, really low, just to kind of illuminate the ladybird a little bit, and 400 ISO. And then this ladybird was walking along doing his thing, and then for like 3 seconds straight, it just stopped, and it stopped there. So I just quickly did my thing, took a few frames. I didn't have the security of an in-camera focus stack, because you know, camera, you tell it to do its thing, it'll shoot the frames, it'll give you a JPEG output, you know there and then that the focus stack has worked. I can't tell you how many times, but I've done it myself, clicking, 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 thinking I've got the best shot in the world here. You go home, you chuck it through the software, realizing, I missed like one vital frame, big out of focus band across the eyes. When the camera does it, you just check the file, you go, yep, that's fine. And if it's not, if the subject's still there, just do it again. And then you've got confirmation that those raw files will just line up perfectly for you later on. I've seen one of these before, cloudfly or horsefly. Yeah, I've been trying to get a shot of one of these for ages, and the only time I've ever seen one is when they're biting on you. But what happens is, once they've bitten you and got a bit full, they have to land somewhere to digest. It's like, right, she's already bit me. I got this hashtag I use called don't swat, take a shot, and this is why, okay? Don't swat them, because you could nudge them off if you get a reaction. So she bit, she filled up, and then she landed on a leaf. And then I had like 15 minutes then to just try and get a nice shot of it. I'm lying down on my belly again just to get that face-on connection. You know, if you shoot portraits or whatever, you know that if you put your camera sensor parallel to the face, that's where you get the most engagement. If you do wildlife photography, like you tend to be at a low angle at the subject's eye level. With bugs, unfortunately, a lot of the time I'm on my belly crawling around like a worm. So this is 3 frames. That's all I really needed just to get the mouth parts and the eyes in. Anything beyond that will take it away from the bits that make this subject so unique. So these creatures, only the females will bite you because they have the mouth parts to do it. So the males, they don't bite you. So it's nasty little ladies, I'm afraid. But they only do it, though, when they need to like feed their eggs and stuff. So they're doing it out of love, really. It just hurts. But I mean, they got like the maddest eyes ever. So my next thing now, I'm going to get like another 2 sets of extension tubes, and I want to photograph like this bit. But it took me 3 years to get that. So I'm come back in 3 years, and maybe we'll get it. Don't look. There's 2 for the price of 1. So this is with the EM1 Mark II, the 60mm macro lens, 2 sets of extension tubes, and has anyone heard of a Raynox DCR 250 macro adapter? It's pretty much a magnifying glass that clicks onto the front of your lens to gain you an extra 2.5 times magnification. I needed it to bring out that spider. Like, I didn't even know they made spiders that small. Like this spotted wolf spider is 6 mil. His face must be 2 or 3. How big is that? And if you look closer, you can actually see his eyes in there. And this is the thing with macro. It just, like I said it a couple of times, but it just reveals things you just can't see. This is 6 frames, handheld focus stack. I deliberately didn't shoot too many of this bit because it would have been too gory. And like, if you got a nervous disposition, you know, it's kind of tough sometimes to just look at a spider. So if I made it super graphic, you're going to be offended and you won't actually pay any attention to the subject and how cool it is. He's got these boxing glove palps. Remember I told you earlier? Used for shaking the maracas at the ladies to woo them. It's weird. I get that a lot. People, like, it's not so much I get hang on, let me change it. There, something pretty on. So I get impatient if I'm not doing it. It's really weird. If I'm not out and about taking pictures, I'm flaky. I'm like, I have to go out. It's like a sheer passion for me. I just love doing it. And if I'm not doing it, I'm like miserable. No amount of bourbons are going to cheer me up. I have to go out taking pictures at least every other day. So
when you're doing your focus stacking,
yeah.
how do you know how much closer for each one you move?
I've got into this thing lately of getting as close as you're gonna need to get and then work your way back. So if it's like a spider or something, just say, if you focus just behind the eyes, that's as close as you're gonna need to get for a portrait, and then start working your way back. If you try doing the other way around, you might get to there and then it's gonna leave. And then you've got like no useful pictures.
How do you keep it on the same plane though?
Keep 5-axis stabilizer, honestly. It is this.
I mean, if you're moving the camera.
You don't. You keep it like that. The only direction you move the camera is front and back. Yeah, there's no other movement. You just keep it locked in. And what I do, I use one of the focus points in the camera as a reference to where I'm using it. So you got the small focus point is constantly somewhere. And then say if I'm taking, don't look a minute. You find one up on the thirds. Another one, right, okay, you can look again now. So when I do this, the focus point is here, and then that's my guide then. So if I'm shooting manually, I know that pupil has to be on that focus point, and then I stack that way then. So, but to get that on the Olympus system, you have to have continuous autofocus set and use it back button. But just never touch the back button. But just that way you keep your focus points live. Don't look a minute. There you go. So this little weevil actually saved the day. So I was out doing my thing. I was like, hey, everyone, got any questions for macro photography? And about 20 questions came in. And I was like, this was a bad idea because it's not even April yet and there's no bugs around. So 8 hours later, I figured, I know, I'll show people how focus stacking works. And I was showing you on the bluebells. And as I was packing up, like a little glint, you know, like in the films where someone spots like a little treasure that's been hidden away, like perhaps under a floorboard for 300 years. This little jewel was peeking at me from between these little petals on the bluebell. So I had the EM1X. It was when like, it kind of first just came out. So I was like trialing it. I had the EM1X. I shot this handheld at a 20th of a second. Obviously the flash helps a little bit, but a 20th with 2 sets of extension tubes. And if you ever look through a macro lens, you'll notice it's wobbly enough anyway. You bring extension tubes into there and it's like mega wobbly. But the stabilizer on the X is so much more improved than the EM1 Mark II that I can actually shoot down to those with one hand now. This literally is a game changer. But to see this creature, I had my mobile phone on a tripod, pointing at it just to illuminate it so I knew where to focus. And then I managed to shoot 2 frames, one for there, one for there. I didn't do like a mega in-depth focus stack. Could have if I wanted to, couldn't I? No. Because this bit came into focus and this bit started coming too sharp and it lost that sort of dreamy look. This weevil is nighttime, it looks like it's sleeping. It's got these beautiful pastel colors and I figured I want to keep it softened down. This is a longhorn beetle. Now these guys have probably got some of the coolest eyeballs I've ever seen. They look like there's fire glowing underneath them. And I spotted it and it was running along the floor and I was like, please dude or lady, whoever you are, please just stay still. And it started running and it stopped on a leaf. So you see this green bit, that's an out of focus leaf just in front of his face. But then it made it look like green and misty under a super shallow depth of field. This is an in-camera focus stack with 2 sets of extension tubes of 15 frames. On the EM1X. It's pretty cool. Keeping things steady is a lot easier in macro photography where you're laying on your belly. So I say it's handheld. I was like this with my elbows on the floor and the camera pressed into my face. But still, it kept everything lined up really, really well. And it's sharp from there to there. You can't do it in one shot. But for me, this is a portrait of an epic looking bug, but I just wanted, like I've never seen eyes like that in anything ever before. I just wanted to show everyone. And focus stacking is the way to go. Now, has anyone seen one of these robber flies before? Yeah. They're awesome, aren't they? Super, super cooperative as well to take pictures of. They're one of those creatures where they really don't care that you're there. Because I saw one, it was a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, I'd never seen one before. I wanted to try and get a picture, and I stalked up as slow as I could. And I was really trying. And I could have just run up to it, taking shots from like this far away. I really didn't care. But I was working with the A1 Mark II, 2 sets of extension tubes again, with a 60mm macro lens and the FL900 on a flash bracket. This is 2-frame focus stack just to get the face in. I shot it at f6.3 just to give me a little bit more depth of field. Because at this stage, I didn't realize how carefree these creatures were. But what happened was, I literally had this much in the frame. So I was like, all right, I want to include more of it, but I haven't got the time to zoom out. So I shot a panorama as well. So I did the focus stack for the face, so because he was still there, I brought the camera down a little bit and took a picture of the legs as well. And then you just blend this bit, and then save them as a file, and then blend the rest then as a normal panorama in Photoshop. And then that way, you could just fit a lot more in. And I could have come back maybe and shot it again, but the print size would have been a lot smaller. At this stage now, this creature could be printed like as bigger than I am because I shot the panorama of it instead of, coming back a little bit. So this now is, I think, my all-time favorite shot of like a damselfly that I managed to get. So we've got the color, which is this beautiful, beautiful yellow. We got a lot of detail there because of the focus stacking, but that pollen just adds another dimension to the picture, doesn't it? Like we see damselfly pictures quite often. I've never seen one land on one of these buttercups before. And he was newly emerged, so I was like, this ain't going anywhere. And I couldn't believe my luck. So I shot a couple of frames for focus stack, but it's holding onto this like one of those gold reflectors they use, to give people an instant tan. So that's bouncing all this beautiful gold light back up under his chin. His mouth is open. It's got all these beautiful bits of pollen on there. And then we got that nice jet black background that you get from exposing the camera so that there's no ambient light in the frame whatsoever, and you're relying purely on the flash. So if I turn that flash off, that would be a jet black frame. You can't see anything. That's how you get the black backgrounds, and then you just add enough flash then just to expose for the main subject. So we're coming to the end, but before we go, just to prove to you that I wasn't lying, check this guy out. The music's not playing, so he has lost his effect a little bit. But look at him shaking his little arms. I think I did a good impression. Look at that. So Wander is just out the sight there. I didn't even know they did this. What a legend. And that's it from me. Thank you so much, guys. Right, we're going to have a little bit of a tea break, a couple of refreshments and whatnot, and then, yeah, pop a kettle on at home. Now's the time. And then a little bit later on, we've got a bit of a 30-minute Q&A. So think of some questions, if you would. And yeah, enjoy yourselves, and I'll see you in a bit.